On one of the spring holidays, I traveled to one of my friends. His family was rich and owned a house in one of the rural villages. My friend and I had the hobby of hunting of all kinds and forms, wild fishing, hunting trips. That is why that village was perfect for us to do all the activities that we love on the holiday. Therefore, as soon as he invited me to his family's house, I did not hesitate again to accept his offer. With the beginning of the holidays, I collected my things and carried my bag and traveled to my friend in the village where his family's house is located. I arrived on Saturday morning to the village. I was very excited to start our trips. My friend's name was Cruff, and he was one of the most courageous people. He loved the new adventures and has no objection to the experience of even strange things, and for this, there was a great consensus between me and him. It was not that first experience in hunting and spending time together. He brought me to the room where I will stay and left my bags. Then I went down to have breakfast with his family. His family was small. Breakfast with his family. His family was. We had the breakfast and then left. His family and everyone wished us luck, while the mother of Cruff affirmed that we would return in time for lunch with the family. I and Cruff started our trip. The village was simple, but it was beautiful. I asked Cruff why we did not take the hunting kit with us. So he told me that he would take me on a tour of the village, and then we can decide where we will start. And indeed, we started our tour. We passed on the school. The church was both simple, but it is suitable for that village, which there are no many people in it. The numbers of people in the village's roads were very simple, and I knew from Cruff that most of the villagers worked in agriculture or in hunting, and for this most of them at this time were doing their work already. We passed more than one area in the village. Cruff spoke a little about each region that we passed through, and when we reached a large land surrounded by trees, Kruvel said to me, identifying Martin's Lake. I looked at him and I did not understand what he says. I thought at the beginning that he was joking. I told him, "Where is the lake?" Cruff laughed on my appearance and said, "This area was a lake. Its name is Martin's Lake." And I answered, "And why was lake called Martin's?" "It is a long story," he said to me. So I said to him, "Well, why don't you tell me? We have a lot of time." Cruff said to me, "If you want to hear it, I have the most appropriate person who can tell you her story." So I said, "Who is he?" He said, "Do not hurry. He's one of the elderly in the village, but he knows everything about that lake. The story will dazzle you." We moved from the location of the lake, and the curiosity was completely controlling my mind. Cruff continued talking about all places in the village, and I felt that it was an ideal place to spend time, and that this trip will be the most beautiful in my life. Our tour ended, and we returned again to the home of a Cruff family. We had lunch with his family. His mother offered to provide us with tea in the garden of the house, but a Cruff told her that we have more to do it now. Indeed, we moved together towards one of the village's homes. Cruff knocked the door. A maid opened the door. She seemed old. Cruff asked her, "Is Mr. John there?" The maid nodded, saying, "Yes, he is inside." We went to the office. There was a huge library. I will not exaggerate when I say that it may contain thousands of books, and perhaps more. We sat for a while, and then an old man entered the room. I swear he was at least 100 years old. He was walking very slowly and seemed tired with every step he took. This man sat in front of us and addressed Cruff. "Welcome to you and your friend." Despite his old age, his voice and words were very clear. We both smiled, and Cruff said, "This is my friend Fred from university. He came here to hunt together." The man replied, "Yes, fishing is fun. Welcome, Fred." I smiled again and said to him, "Thank you." Cruff looked at me and said, "This is my friend John Hill. I wanted you to meet him. He is the wise man of that village and knows the entire history of the village. He can also answer your question about Martin's Lake." We both looked at the man, and Cruff began to persuade him to tell what he knew. Finally, the man turned his back and began to tell the whole story. On the Christmas of the year 1683, the atmosphere was very cold. Snow covered everything in the village. That night, the young George Martin returned to the village from the university. He was a student at the University of Cambridge and used to return to the village on every holiday. The young man, Martin, is known and famous in the village. He was one of the first people to complete their university education. He was also one of the enriched families in the village. His father was the owner of most of the village's lands. Martin was a handsome young man who could fall into a fine easily. He was also athletic and loved horseback. He used to ride his horse and walk for long distances around the village to visit his friends and relatives. On that night in which Martin returned, the snow was falling, and for this he decided to stay in the hotel that is located at the beginning of the village. because he was unable to find anything that could carry him to his family's house, especially since the road that night was closed. And after some time, the young Martin felt bored, and for this he went down to the lobby of the hotel to find any activity that he could do until the next morning. At that time, he heard the sounds of music flowing from one of the sides of the hotel, so he went to urge this sound and found that the hotel has a small bar that works for each evening. That bar was keen on the presence of my musical team playing all night. The inmates used to enter this bar to enjoy. Even young men and women in the village used to come to this bar to enjoy music and drink at the same time. Indeed, Martin entered the bar and saw that there was a festive, enjoyable atmosphere. He ordered a drink and sat watching what was happening. Everyone was dancing together, every young man with every girl. Martin was watching them enthusiastically, and while observing what was happening around him, there was a gentle girl and appeared to be innocent, and she was sitting alone. She didn't dance with anyone, and no one shares her table. That is why Martin rose from his place heading to her and offered her to dance. The name of that girl was Anne Clark, a rural girl from the village working in the hotel, and came this day to visit her friend Sarah, and sat waiting until Sarah ended from her work. As soon as Martin's offer on the dance, she agreed immediately. As I said before, Martin was famous, handsome, and rich, and therefore a young woman like Anne can't refuse. Anne danced with Martin, and everyone looked at them with amazement. How can a young man like Martin dance with that simple girl? In fact, Martin was attracted to her, and perhaps it was just compassion, but sure, Martin enjoyed his dance with Anne. Then they danced on a song that she said, "My lady, will you walk? Are you going to talk to me?" As for that, it was clear to everyone how happy Anne felt because Martin danced with her. Everyone who were on the bar on that night is that her face lit up with a very special smile. That night ended, and Martin returned to his room, and in the morning he returned to his house. As for Anne, she went to her home, and she felt that she was walking on the clouds from her feeling of happiness after what happened with her. Since that night, Martin used to go to the hotel every week, and specifically to the bar, so he sees Anne. She was waiting for him, even without a prior date. Martin was riding his horse and heading to the hotel and starting to sing the song that they danced by. "My lady, will you walk? Are you going to talk to me?" Immediately, it rushed to go to him. The meetings were repeated between Martin, and a lot of the villagers knew that there is something that is going on between them, especially that many people saw them walking together on the banks of the lake. Some confirmed that they saw Martin and Anne exchanging kisses. The relationship between Martin and Anna continued in the same way for several months, until the day came when Martin knew that his father chose a wife for him. The marriage was arranged in that period. As all families are looking for a bride suitable for their son, the primary goal of marriage was growing the work and double the wealth. Thus, George Martin's father chose his son's wife from a rich family. No less than them is rich. It was a beautiful and educated young woman and a good family, which made everyone envy Martin on that bride and say that he is very lucky with this choice. But soon things worsened. The bride knew that her fiancé, Mr. George Martin, has a lover already. He meets her and loves her. That is why the bride got angry and decided not to complete her marriage plans for Martin, because from her point of view that Martin is a noble man and it's not correct to have a relationship with a regular rural girl. Thus, she informed her family of her decision, and her family talked with the Martin family in order to tell them that their daughter's marriage to their son Martin is off. Martin was very angry because he lost a very important opportunity, and of course Martin felt anger at what his father said to him. He began to review his relationship with and felt then regret, because this relationship was a reason that he lost the beautiful bride. After that accident, the problems began between Martin and Anne. In one of the differences between them, the people saw Martin hitting Anne, but it seems that the matter did not end there. After a whole week passed on the incident, Martin returned again to the hotel on the back of his horse and began to sing, "My lady, will you walk? Are you going to talk to me?" Here, Anne went out to meet him, and she was very happy and did not believe that Martin returned to her again. Indeed, many people saw them on that day. It is said that Martin was very romantic with her. He whispered in her ear with some words, and then left her and rode his horse again and returned to his home. She was very happy throughout the day. She told her friend Sarah what happened and confirmed that Martin still loves her. Unfortunately, it was not a long time before that day until Anne completely disappeared. No one can find her anywhere. Her family is looking for her every day. Even the workers at the hotel and friends were looking for her, and no one can find her. Anne disappeared and no one knows where she went. Some said at the time that she may have married George Martin and fled with him to another village. Several weeks passed and Anne is still missing. On one night, Martin felt that he needed the drink and then went to the bar in the hotel. He sat and asked for a drink, and here Sarah, a friend of Anne, came to give him the drink and asked him sadly, "Are you looking for Anne, sir?" Unfortunately, no one saw her for weeks. Sarah expected him to express his love or anxiety, or perhaps his fear at the time, but the answer came in contrast to all her perceptions. Martin answered her angrily, "I am not looking for her." Sarah went back to her work. Martin sat in his place for a long time, to the extent that most of the customers in the bar actually left, and it was nearly the closing time. Sarah was busy with her work and at this time washed some cups and returned bottles to their places, and then she started to sing, "My lady, will you walk? Are you going to talk to me?" As soon as Martin heard her, his face turned completely. He became pale. He shouted loudly, "Stop singing now!" the moment they heard the voice of Anne. So Sarah cried out with happiness, "It is Anne!" She returned. Sarah was unable to control her tears. She cried and ran towards the door. Martin cried at the same time, "Stop!" But Sarah had preceded him and went to open the door. And just when she opened the door, strong and cold winds came in. Then Sarah heard footsteps and sound of the large cabinet in front of the bar's door opened and then closed again. Sarah rushed to enter behind the bar table and ignited the lamps. In that second, she looked at the big cabinet and saw part of the fabric looks like a woman's dress. It looks like stuck under the door of the cabinet. Sarah felt very fearful and summoned one of the men working with her in the bar. She referred to him on the cabinet and asked him to open it. As soon as the man opened the cabinet door, George Martin looked at the cabinet and ran from the pub to the street quickly. A human model got out the cabinet. It was small and wearing clothes that seemed clearly wet and had no face. Once people saw this model, they felt frozen winds that invade the place again, and the darkness returned to the place again. And immediately after that, Sarah ignited the lamps again. There was nothing. As for Mr. Martin at this time, he fled running from the bar and heading to the lake. He was seen only by a little boy who was returning to his home after he finished hunting in the lake. This child said that Mr. Martin was running towards the water, and he seemed very afraid. Mr. Martin went into the water, and the little child heard the sounds of breaking the branches in the water. After a few minutes, the boy heard a strange screaming sound, as if he came from under the water. The sound was so high that Martin covered his ears, and in the meantime, the young saw someone going up from under the water and chasing Martin across the lake away from the trees. The child did not understand what was happening, but he ran to the police to tell them what happened. The police arrived at the lake, but the darkness covered everything, and the cold was tense, and it was not possible for anyone to go down to the lake at this time, because in this way, he would risk his life, and instead of saving Mr. Martin, this person will need someone to save him. And here the news reached the family of the young man, Martin. His father went to the police and told them that his son was fine and that he was at home and he did not drown in the lake as it is said. But at the same time, one of the officers found a blood-covered knife lying under one of the trees. By examining that knife, they discovered that it returns to George Martin, as the first letters of George Martin's name were engraved at the hand of the knife. And here the search operations began in the lake because the police suspected that Mr. Martin had already killed anyone last night. But the strange thing is that this search operation had already resulted in the corpse. The body of a young woman was in the lake. It was a skeleton, but people were able to identify her from her clothes and confirm that she is Anne Clark. The police confirmed this matter after the Anne family came and got acquainted with the clothes. Then Martin was accused of killing, and indeed he was sentenced to death and was hanging 5 weeks after the discovery of Anne's body. It is said that Martin was in his last days suffering from severe hallucinations, and he was declared in the name of Anne at lots of the time. Over the years, the lake has completely dried up, but despite that, people still know it as Martin's Lake, and the song "My Lady, Will You Walk? You Will Talk to Me" was hated in the whole village, and no one is singing it because everyone believes that it will bring them bad luck. Fred and Cruff left the old house of John Hill. Fred was very sad, but he tried to forget everything he heard in order to be able to spend a pleasant holiday. Indeed, he spent a good time with a good time, and they made many good hunting trips. Cruff was keen to try new things every day to entertain his friend, and at the last days of the trip and before leaving, Fred asked Cruff to go to Martin's Lake to take a look. Indeed, they went there, and Fred felt sad and pain of what happened to that girl Anne. Fred returned with Cruff to his home, and after having dinner, he went up to his room to sleep because he would leave the next morning. At that night, Fred dreamed the strangest thing that anyone can imagine. Fred dreamed that he sees Martin while he was singing, "My lady, will you walk? Will you talk to me?" After that, he saw Anne going out to Martin speeding. Martin told her that he loved her very much and wanted to spend time with her. They agreed that they met in the evening at the lake. Indeed, Anne went and waited Martin until he arrived, and as soon as he arrived, she approached him to embrace him, but he kept her away from him in cruelty and said to her, "I brought you here to end everything." She did not understand what he was saying and said to him crying, "What does this mean? Did you not tell me that you love me and want to spend some time with me?" Martin's face changed and said to her, "No, I want to get rid of you completely." Here she said to him, "You will get rid of me and your child?" Martin was shocked, got close to her and grabbed her from her neck, saying, "What do you say? What do you mean?" Anne tried to escape from his hand, and indeed she moved away a little and said, "Yes, I am pregnant in your child and you must marry me. Otherwise I will tell the whole village about me and you and our child." Then she turned to go away from him. Martin did not bear what Anne just said, and he took a knife out of his pocket and fastened her to hold on to and slaughtered her, and then tied some stones in her feet and threw her in the lake. Fred woke up and didn't believe what he just saw. He did not understand what happened. How can a person do this with a girl who loved him, and why he might do this? To marry another rich woman. Fred was feeling angry and sad because of what he saw. He was unable to know if what happened was just a passing dream that he saw during his sleep, as if it was an attempt by his subconscious to find the end of Martin's story, or if what he saw in his dream was an attempt of Anne to tell him what happened between her and Martin on that night and how he wronged and betrayed her and his child. Fred left Cruff's house on that day, but he never forgotten Martin's lake or the dream he saw in his last days at his friend's house. After years, Fred returned to the Cruff's house, who was celebrating his marriage in his family's country house. At that time, Fred was also married, and his wife went with him. She loved the village a lot. Fred was keen to give her a unique tour, and in that tour he told her what he knew on his last visit, but he didn't tell her about his dream. In the evening, Fred and his wife went to sleep. The next morning, his wife woke up and told him a strange dream that did not find its meaning. She started to tell him what she saw. Fred was shocked. Then he told her about his dream. He was sure that what he dreamed of was not merely reassuring his subconscious mind. Rather, it was Anne's spirit that told him what happened to her on that horrible night.